The annual assessment notice for the Grand Cypress Homeowners Association arrived not with a whimper, but with a catastrophic bang. It landed with the weight of a stone tablet on the polished wood of the kitchen island, an absurd document designed to extract compliance rather than partnership. For years, the fees have been a predictable, if irritating, part of suburban life. The tacit cost of manicured lawns and functional streetlights. But this year, the number was a gross distortion of reality. A demand for $12,000, a tenfold leap from the previous year's assessment. The paper felt cold, the ink starkly black, a tangible symbol of the financial tyranny exerted by the HOA Board. The reason for this astronomical figure, according to the accompanying paragraph, was vague at best, insulting at worst. Unexpected capital improvement requirements and expanded administrative oversight. There was no attached budget, no list of projects, no minutes from a meeting justifying the expenditure, just a bald, unyielding demand for 5 figures, payable in 30 days, or face immediate liens and punitive interest. This was a final, breaking straw for a community already frayed by months of petty micromanagement and obvious neglect. For the past year, the Grand Cypress HOA Board, colloquially and venomously known by residents as a council, had ruled with an iron fist clad in cheap velvet. Their vice president, a woman we shall call Patrice, was a self-appointed neighborhood curator, sending out daily violation notices for everything from the exact shade of gray on a permitted mailbox to the length of time a recycling bin remained curbside. Yet, the essential, shared assets of the community were rotting. The centerpiece fountain in the main plaza had been dry for 6 months, accumulating algae and litter. The community gym's air conditioning unit had failed in the brutal summer heat, rendering the facility unusable. Requests for repairs were met with stonewalling, while requests for financial transparency were answered with condescending form letters referencing proprietary information. The financial reports that were eventually squeezed out of the board were masterpieces of obfuscation. They were filled with massive, amorphous line items, $50,000 for consulting fees, and $80,000 mysteriously allocated to reserve study refreshment, terms that sounded official but lacked any corresponding documentation or vendor invoices. It was clear to anyone with a passing understanding of basic accounting that the money was being handled at best recklessly and at worst illegally. My own attempt at dialogue were typical of the board's attitude. I had sent 3 separate, registered letters demanding a granular, itemized breakdown of the $12,000 fee, citing the HOA's own bylaws that promised annual disclosure of all financial transactions over a certain threshold. The only response I received was a 1-line email from the HOA's third-party management firm, simply stating, "The fee is validated by the board. Pay it." This dismissal, this absolute lack of respect for people funding their entire operation, solidified a deep, cold resolve within me. Polite requests had failed. Legal threats, though tempting, would be long, expensive, and drawn out. A different approach was necessary, one that was public, impossible to ignore, and perfectly legal under the very documents they weaponized against the homeowners. The protest had to be administrative chaos, delivered with impeccable compliance. The idea, initially a fleeting moment of black humor, quickly grew into a brilliant, heavy reality. The goal was to force the council, and specifically the poor, overworked soul in the management office, to spend an inordinate, frustrating amount of time on a single, perfectly legal transaction. The payment, the massive, unjustifiable $12,000 fee, would be paid in the lowest denomination of United States currency, the humble penny. The legal framework was flawless. The HOACC and RS stated, as nearly all do, that fees must be paid in legal tender. A single penny is legal tender. 1,200,000 pennies would be a payment in full. The sheer scale of the operation was daunting. 1.2 million pennies, weighing in at over 6,600 pounds or 3 metric tons. This was no prank. This was an act of economic and logistical warfare, a physical manifestation of the heavy burden of unaccountability the board had placed upon its community. The planning began immediately, meticulous and fueled by righteous indignation, transforming from a homeowner into a logistical commander preparing for a heavy, low-value siege. The gathering of the Copper Army would require weeks of careful execution and utter secrecy. The scale of the task, acquiring 1.2 million pennies, demanded a strategy that bordered on the covert. This was not a request a single bank manager could or would fulfill. A single pallet of pennies, roughly 6,600 pounds, would raise immediate red flags, triggering currency transaction reports and guaranteed refusal. The entire operation had to be decentralized, compartmentalized, and utterly discreet. It became a silent, obsessive campaign spanning 4 states in 3 weeks, exploiting the automated efficiency and fragmented nature of the modern banking system. The first step was establishing a network of acquisition points. I began by opening accounts or leveraging existing dormant accounts at nearly a dozen different regional and national bank chains across the metropolitan area and its extended suburbs. The goal was to spread the withdrawal load so thinly that no single branch manager would ever see a transaction large enough to warrant suspicion. I employed a meticulous schedule, visiting only 1 branch per bank per day, sometimes making trips 50 miles away to neighboring counties where I was an unknown face. The technique used at the teller window was key. Never once did I ask for pennies or rolls of cents. I requested coin orders or pre-wrapped currency for a business. The amounts were kept small and frequent, $50 to $100 worth of pennies per visit, often paired with legitimate-sounding transaction, like exchanging a larger bill or depositing a check. This required patience. At 120,000 cents per day, I would still only be hitting 1/10 of the total requirement. I had to become a fixture in the obscure, mid-morning hours of bank lobbies, unremarkable and polite. To accelerate the process, I enlisted the aid of a few close, trustworthy associates, friends who lived in different towns and were willing to dedicate a few hours a week to making these small, innocuous coin orders. They were given specific instructions on how to handle the transactions and transport the immediate payload. Each acquisition was treated like a successful mission, adding a small, tangible weight to the growing arsenal. The logistical challenge of storage was immense. The pennies were delivered in standard bankroll wrappers, 50 cents per roll. These rolls had to be immediately transferred and secured. I purchased dozens of military-grade, stackable plastic storage containers. Each container was meticulously labeled and documented with a ledger. The first layer of organization involved grouping the rolls into $10 increments, taping them tightly together to prevent unraveling. Then, these $10 blocks were stacked into the larger containers, each container designated to hold exactly $500 worth of pennies. This provided a flawless, easily verifiable count. My garage slowly transformed into a currency storage facility. The weight of the copper zinc alloy began to warp the concrete floor in a subtle but noticeable way. The containers, when full, were too heavy for a single person to lift, forcing the use of a floor jack and a heavy-duty pallet to move them. The collective thudding sound of 6,600 pounds of metal resting on the ground became the soundtrack of my evenings. It was a silent, heavy, and profound commitment to a protest against financial recklessness. Every penny acquired, every roll taped, was a direct refutation of the Grand Cypress Board's arrogance. As the end of the 3rd week approached, the final, heavy containers were sealed, their combined weight representing exactly $12,000. The copper army was fully amassed, ready for deployment against the unsuspecting, final recipient at the HOA management office. The stage was set for the spectacular climax of this administrative rebellion. With the entire sum of $12,000 secured and meticulously packaged, the focus shifted entirely to the logistics of delivery. This was not a trip to the post office. It was a transportation of a 3-ton payload of currency, requiring specialized equipment and military-grade precision in timing. The objective was clear: to deliver the full, exact payment into the hands of the HOA management office staff in the final, agonizing minutes of the final deadline, maximizing the administrative shock and minimizing their time to strategize a refusal. The total mass of the 1.2 million pennies necessitated the rental of a heavy-duty, box-style cargo van. My personal vehicle, even a large SUV, could not safely handle the sheer weight without risking catastrophic mechanical failure. I spent a Saturday morning sourcing the correct equipment: the high-capacity van, 2 specialized industrial-grade pallet jacks, and a robust metal-framed hand truck designed for appliance moving. To maintain the illusion of mundane business, I also acquired heavy, commercial moving blankets to conceal the dozens of sealed plastic containers under the guise of an ordinary furniture transfer. The actual loading process was an exercise in controlled, back-breaking effort. Each $500 container weighed approximately 275 pounds. Using the pallet jack and floor-level hoist, the containers were carefully maneuvered from my reinforced garage corner onto the van. The weight distribution was calculated for optimal safety and stability during the drive. The entire cargo bay became a secured vault of low-denomination currency, a silent testament to the months of grievance and the calculated disruption to come. Crucially, the Grand Cypress HOA Management Office was located in a nondescript, multi-tenant commercial office park. The building itself had no loading dock or service entrance, only a standard double-glass door at the main lobby. This posed a significant constraint. The entire 6,600-pound payload would have to be moved via the narrow internal corridors and possibly a standard elevator, further complicating the delivery. This was not a flaw in the plan, but a feature. Every obstacle in delivery translated into exponentially greater difficulty for management staff when they inevitably had to move the coins themselves. The chosen day for delivery was the absolute deadline, precisely the 30th day, a Tuesday. The management office's public hours ended at 5 p.m. My route was pre-driven and timed, a 35-minute journey from the storage location. I aimed for arrival at 4:45 p.m. This 15-minute buffer was crucial. It was enough time to secure the necessary documentation from the bank confirming the legality of the currency rolls, and more than enough time to begin the actual delivery process before the official close of business. The element of surprise, coupled with the legality of the payment and the impending closure of the office, was the ultimate lever. The van was parked as close as possible to the main entrance. I took a deep, steadying breath, the metal clanking slightly in the back of the van, the sound of an administrative siege about to commence. The point of no return had been crossed. The battle for accountability was about to become very, very heavy. The digital clock on the dashboard read precisely 4:45 p.m. as I cut the engine of the rented cargo van. The parking spot, deliberately chosen, was the closest accessible one to the main entrance of the commercial office park, minimizing the distance required to transport the massive copper payload. Inside the vehicle, the immense weight of 1.2 million pennies was a palpable, silent presence. The moment was heavy, charged with the anticipation of conflict and the satisfying certainty of administrative disruption. I exited the van, pulling on a pair of industrial work gloves and adopting an air of weary, professional exhaustion, the perfect disguise for someone merely attempting to complete a late-day business transaction. The initial push required was significant. I used the appliance hand truck, rated for several hundred pounds, and began unloading the first two containers, each holding exactly $500 in meticulously taped and verified coin rolls. The weight of just those two containers, over 550 pounds, was a physical anchor. Securing the containers onto the hand truck, I guided the heavy load toward the glass entrance doors of the office park lobby. The scraping of the solid rubber wheels on the concrete walkway was loud in the late afternoon quiet. I maneuvered the hand truck through the double doors, crossing the threshold into the air-conditioned, sterile quiet of the lobby. The Grand Cypress HOA Management Office Suite was situated on the ground floor, just off the main hallway. The reception area was small, furnished in the bland, inexpensive decor typical of third-party management companies. Synthetic carpet, a low-slung, uncomfortable sofa, and a counter of faux marble laminate. Behind this counter sat the unfortunate individual assigned to the 5 p.m. closing shift. Her name, I would later learn, was Susan, an older woman with tired eyes and a face already set in a grimace of end-of-day fatigue. Susan was the wall between the board and the homeowners, and she was about to face the single heaviest payment in the history of property management. Susan looked up, startled by the noise of the hand truck's heavy rubber wheels gripping the carpet. Her eyes widened, focusing first on the sheer bulk of the containers, large, opaque, industrial plastic, and then slowly tracking up to my face. I approached the counter, maintaining a calm, unhurried pace, and addressed her in a neutral, businesslike tone that allowed no room for emotional argument. "Good afternoon," I am here to remit my annual assessment payment for Lot 37A in the Grand Cypress community, I stated, reaching into my pocket and extracting a pre-written letter that served as my official cover document. The total amount due is exactly $12,000. I presented the letter first, an official document clearly stating the parcel number, the payment amount, and the date, underscoring the punctuality of the transaction. Then, with a practiced, deliberate movement, I removed the moving blanket covering the 2 containers on a hand truck. The sight of hundreds of rolls of pennies, tightly bound and packed, reflecting the fluorescent overhead lighting, was designed to be instantly jarring. Susan's reaction was immediate and visceral. Her tired eyes snapped wide, and she recoiled slightly, as if the copper were radiating heat. "Sir, what is this?" she stammered, her voice thin with disbelief. "You can't be serious. Is this coin?" "It is exactly $1,000 in U.S. legal tender coin, as defined by the Coinage Act of 1965. On this hand truck," I explained, my voice steady. "The remaining $11,000 worth of currency is waiting outside in the vehicle, which I will bring in progressively. I require an official, dated receipt for the full amount of $12,000 upon verification and processing the payment." The use of precise legal language was key. I avoided terms like pennies or change, sticking only to legal tender and currency. Susan instantly understood the magnitude of the problem. This was not a customer trying to be funny with a few dollars in change. This was an administrative assault weaponized by the law. She pushed back instantly, adopting the defensive posture of a trained gatekeeper. "I cannot accept this. This is an inappropriate form of payment. We accept checks, money orders, or electronic transfer. This is unacceptable." I remained calm, leaning slightly on the counter to emphasize my commitment to staying put. "I understand your preference, but the Grand Cypress CC and RS, Article 4, Section 3, explicitly state that all fees shall be remitted in legal tender of the United States. There is no clause prohibiting payment by coin, nor any minimum threshold for coin acceptance. I am making a full, timely payment, and under the law, you cannot refuse it." She grabbed the phone instantly, her fingers fumbling with the keypad, already dialing the number for her immediate supervisor, or perhaps one of the board members. The frantic energy of her action contrasted sharply with my motionless patience. "I have to call Mr. Harrison immediately. Please wait here. Do not bring any more of that inside." While she was engaged in a muffled, obviously heated exchange, I could clearly hear the raised voice on the other end, shouting about malicious intent and security risks. I took the opportunity to document the scene. I subtly angled my phone, not to record audio, but to capture several high-resolution photographs of the hand truck, the containers, the time on the wall clock, and Susan mid-call, her expression a perfect portrait of managerial distress. The evidence of the time of delivery was essential to defeat any later claims of late payment or technical rejection. Susan slammed the phone down, her face white with anger and frustration. "Mr. Harrison states that this payment is considered a vexatious and deliberately disruptive act, and that the association reserved the right to charge an additional administrative fee for the extraordinary labor required to process this volume of coin. That is a potential charge for a future discussion." I countered immediately, smiling politely. "Currently, I am here to tender payment. The fees are not paid until accepted. Mr. Harrison must understand that charging a fee to process a legal, timely payment is itself a violation of contract law and opens the association to liability for illegal fining. Furthermore," I added, referencing my meticulously prepared documents, "I have confirmed the accuracy of the currency rolls. The coins are contained in standard bank wrap rolls, 50 cents each, which are then grouped and taped into verifiable $10 blocks. You merely need to count the 1,200 blocks to confirm the $12,000 total." This detail, the pre-rolled, pre-verified nature of the payment, was the second administrative strike. They could not argue that loose pennies were unmanageable. They had to argue against accepting rolls of currency. Susan, momentarily deflated by the legal precision and logistical setup, knew she was fighting a losing battle. The clock was ticking toward 5 p.m. If she refused payment before closing, the HOA would have to issue a notice of non-payment and start a long expensive legal process, which I was ready for. If she accepted it, they were stuck with 6,600 pounds of copper. She let out a sound of exasperation that was half sigh, half groan. Fine. We will formally log the receipt of the payment at the close of business. You may bring the remaining currency into the lobby, but I am logging this as a conditionally accepted, non-standard payment, pending full physical audit of the count. I will not issue a receipt until the count is verified, which will happen tomorrow morning. Agreed, I said instantly, pulling out a pre-printed form I had drafted. However, I do require your signature acknowledging the time and date of this initial delivery and the stated amount being tendered, $12,000. This merely documents the act of payment for my own records, ensuring I am not penalized for lateness. Susan hesitated, glaring at the form, but finally grabbed a pen and scrawled her signature on the line under the date and time stamp. Unable to refuse documentation that merely acknowledged a physical delivery, with that signature secured, the final, exhausting phase of the operation began. I spent the next half hour, well past the 5 p.m. closing time, hauling the remaining plastic containers from a van, through the glass doors, and into the small reception area. The total mass of the 24 heavy containers, stacked 4 high, transformed the sterile HOA lobby into an absurdity. It was a physical monument to financial accountability, a silent, weighty reminder of the leverage a single homeowner could gain when armed with legal technicality and a serious commitment to logistics. Susan was forced to sit there, watching the sheer magnitude of the coin pile up, a victim of her board's own arrogance and disregard for rules that were now being used against them with devastating effect. The office door was finally locked, not with a standard closed sign, but with a mountain of copper currencies standing guard within. The payment was in. The board had been successfully and physically crippled by its own dues. The morning after the delivery, the atmosphere at the Grand Cypress HOA management office was not merely tense. It was a pressurized environment of institutional panic. Susan, the office manager, arrived to face the $12,000 worth of pennies, a 3-ton mountain of copper zinc that had entirely colonized her small reception area. The sight of the dozens of sealed industrial buckets standing guard where the uncomfortable visitor's sofa once sat was an immediate, glaring testament to the administrative crisis. Her first action was a desperate, urgent call to Mr. Harrison, the regional supervisor for management company and the direct liaison to the HOA Board. Harrison's voice, even relayed through Susan's muffled account, was laced with pure, incandescent rage. He viewed the payment not as a protest, but as an act of personal malice and professional humiliation. The fact that the payment had to be accepted and, worse, counted, was an unacceptable insult to his authority and the dignity of the association. Harrison's initial command was predictable: reject the payment retroactively. He instructed Susan to immediately send me a notice claiming the currency was unfit for deposit due to excessive handling burden and demand the payment be retendered in a standard form. This, he declared, was the only way to save face and avoid the monumental logistical task ahead. However, Susan, remembering the chilling precision of my legal references the previous evening, pushed back slightly, explaining the exact language of the legal tender clause and the signed acknowledgement of delivery. She warned him that a retroactive rejection, especially after confirming the full amount was present, would expose the HOA to a swift and devastating lawsuit for arbitrary non-acceptance and potential illegal fining. Harrison, realizing the legal quicksand, reluctantly rescinded the outright rejection order, but his fury did not subside. The new command was simple: process the payment, but make the process as punitive as possible. He instructed Susan to bring in temporary staff, expensive, agency-hired laborers, to begin the counting and verification process immediately. This, he reasoned, would not only ensure the count, but also generate a massive expense that they could potentially levy against me as an extraordinary administrative cost of the payment. The ensuing scene at the management office was an absolute theater of the absurd. 2 bewildered, underpaid temp workers, armed only with a clipboard and calculator, were tasked with verifying 1.2 million pennies. The process was agonizingly slow. While the pennies were pre-rolled and taped in verified blocks, bank policy required the management company to treat the entire haul as unverified cash until it could be processed by a certified coin counting machine. which, of course, the small HOA office did not possess. Each container had to be unsealed, the rolls inspected for tampering, and the number of blocks meticulously logged. The sheer weight and volume meant the small office was instantly congested. The temporary counting table they set up groaned under the load. Meanwhile, Patrice, the notoriously severe vice president of the Grand Cypress Board, arrived unannounced. She was livid, demanding to know how her management company could have allowed such an act of domestic terrorism to occur. She swept into the office, saw the spectacle of the counting, and immediately confronted Susan, accusing her of professional incompetence and demanding to see the homeowner's file. Patrice vowed that I would be fined not just for the counting fee, but for damaging the reputation of the community and creating an unsafe work environment. The cost of this forced administrative labor was soaring. The temp workers were paid a high hourly rate, and the process was so physically demanding and tedious that they required frequent breaks. By the end of the first day, they had managed to verify only about $2,500 worth of the currency. The clock was ticking. The money was being wasted, and the vast remaining majority of the assessment money, $9,500.00, was locked away, unusable by the HOA, tying up the liquidity and creating a genuine operating crisis. The protest was no longer just an inconvenience. It was a financial chokehold. The board was forced to spend thousands of dollars just to unlock the payment, proving the very mismanagement the pennies were intended to protest. The silence of the 1.2 million coins spoke louder than any angry meeting could have. The physical presence of the 1.2 million pennies was a constant, grating reminder of the board's impotence. The counting continued at a glacial pace, tying up staff and generating an absurdly high administrative bill. Mr. Harrison and the board, particularly the venomous Vice President Patrice, were consumed by the desire for swift, public retribution. They could not let this act of open rebellion go unpunished. Their response, however, was fueled by blind anger rather than legal counsel, leading directly into the next phase of the homeowner's administrative counterattack. On the third day following the delivery, a harsh, official-looking document arrived via certified mail, a notice of extraordinary assessment and fine. The document was a masterpiece of legal overreach and wounded institutional pride. It demanded immediate payment of $8,750, broken down into two components: a $3,500 administrative disruption fee to cover the cost of the temporary labor hire to count the coins, and a flat $5,250 fine levied for conduct prejudicial to the interests of the association and harassment of management staff. Citing the vague good conduct clause in the CC and RS, the letter was signed jointly by Mr. Harrison and the board chairman, a clear attempt to lend maximum authority to the threat. They stipulated that this new, illegal fine had to be paid in certified funds, no cash, no coins, within 72 hours, or the amount would immediately be secured by a lien against the property. This was the exact, predictable trap the homeowner had anticipated. The board had chosen a fight on the weakest legal ground imaginable. They had attempted to fine a resident for the method of illegal payment, a clear violation of established contract and property law. The homeowner immediately forwarded the entire package, the notice of assessment, the original payment acknowledgement signed by Susan, and copies of the relevant legal tender bylaws to their real estate attorney, a sharp, experienced professional who specialized in the bureaucratic abuses of overly aggressive HOAs. The attorney's response was swift and devastating. Within 24 hours, a certified letter, printed on heavy legal paper and dripping with professional authority, landed on Mr. Harrison's desk and was carbon copied to every single member of the Grand Cypress Board. This document, the lawyer's hammer, systematically dismantled the board's position. First, the letter addressed the administrative disruption fee. The attorney cited multiple legal precedents establishing that an entity cannot charge a fee for the cost of processing a legal, timely payment. The letter argued that the board's decision to hire costly temporary labor rather than using standard banking services was a failure of the association's own managerial discretion, not an expense attributable to the homeowner. It demanded an immediate accounting of the funds spent on the counting to date, noting that any funds improperly disbursed might constitute a breach of fiduciary duty. The lawyer emphasized that the money spent on temporary labor was literally the definition of the financial mismanagement The coin payment was designed to protest. Second, the letter targeted the conduct fine. The attorney stated unequivocally that the act of tendering payment in legal currency, while perhaps inconvenient, cannot legally be construed as harassment or prejudicial conduct. The letter threatened an immediate lawsuit for defamation and tortious interference should the board proceed with a lien based on these trumped-up charges. The lawyer noted that the fines were arbitrary, punitive, and lacked the legally required formal hearing and notification process, rendering them void from the outset. The core of the legal threat was simple and powerful. Rescind the fines immediately and issue a formal, written statement confirming the payment of $12,000 has been accepted and fully processed. If they did not comply within 48 hours, the attorney would file a formal complaint with the state's attorney general's office, alleging corporate mismanagement and harassment, and initiate a civil suit seeking full recovery of all legal fees, plus punitive damages for malicious action. The arrival of the attorney's letter had the intended chilling effect. Harrison and the board, confronted with the cold, hard reality of litigation costs and the absolute certainty of defeat, immediately went into damage control mode. The chairman, a man who preferred to delegate all conflict, panicked. He knew that any lawsuit filed would instantly bring the entire coin debacle, the exorbitant fee increase, and a lack of financial transparency into public record, guaranteeing the community wide-scale rebellion. Mr. Harrison reluctantly instructed Susan to cease the costly temporary counting labor, leaving the remaining $5,000 of the payment still sitting in heavy buckets in the back room, and focus only on issuing a formal receipt. The temporary fine was rescinded with an embarrassed, curt internal memo, and a clean, unconditional receipt for $12,000 was printed. The official certified notice of the fine was nullified and replaced with a sterile, one-sentence letter confirming that the annual assessment for Lot 37A had been satisfied in full. The board's furious attempt at retaliation had failed spectacularly, costing them several $1,000s in pointless labor and forcing them to officially validate the very protest they hated. The homeowner was paid up, the board was humiliated, and the stage was now set for the community to recognize this victory as their own. The moment the certified letter confirming the full and unconditional acceptance of the $12,000 coin payment arrived, the stage was officially set for the protest to go viral within the Grand Cypress community. The board had attempted to bury the incident through legal threats and bureaucratic silence, but the very act of sending out the formal receipt, coupled with the sudden, inexplicable rescission of the massive retaliatory fine, sent immediate and powerful signals to the community's inner network. The first hint came from the management office itself. A reliable source, a security guard who frequently observed the office during his evening rounds, began sharing reports on the neighborhood's heavily guarded private social media group. He spoke of the endless parade of high-capacity hand trucks, the strange, continuous metallic clanking sound coming from the back rooms, and the sight of frustrated temp workers meticulously counting coin for days. He mentioned the board vice president, Patrice, having a near meltdown in the lobby, shouting at the management staff about the copper insurgency. Then the official receipt itself, circulated anonymously by a sympathetic insider, provided the irrefutable evidence. The simple confirmation that the fee for Lot 37A had been satisfied in full, following a week of chaotic rumors, spoke volumes. It proved that a single homeowner had successfully, legally, and spectacularly defied the board's financial demands and survived the subsequent attempt at institutional revenge. The initial fear that the board instilled in the community, the fear of fines, liens, and legal entanglement, had been shattered by the sheer, heavy weight of 1.2 million pennies. The reaction online was immediate and ferocious. The anonymous message board, which previously hosted only tepid complaints and fearful whispers, exploded with admiration and demand for action. Residents who had been quietly stewing over the arbitrary fines, the non-functional community amenities, and the opaque accounting suddenly realized they had a powerful, non-violent administrative weapon. The story wasn't just about a payment. It was about the successful legal weaponization of the board's own rules. The protest became known instantly as the Copper Tsunami, and it served as the perfect rallying cry against the council's tyranny. The initial apathy dissolved into collective outrage. Homeowners began flooding the board's public email address, not with complaints, but with demands that referenced the successful payment and the subsequent, failed retaliation. The tone had shifted from subservient pleading to empowered defiance. The most critical turning point was the formation of the Grand Cypress Accountability Coalition, GCAC, a core group of residents, energized by the success of the penny protests, quickly organized a focused opposition. Their first official act was to draft a petition demanding an emergency general meeting of all homeowners, explicitly listing the agenda items, the demand for a full independent forensic audit of the books, and a formal vote of no confidence against the existing board members, including Patrice and the chairman. The bylaws required signatures from 20% of the membership to force such a meeting. With the energy provided by the copper tsunami, the GCAC gathered the required signatures in less than 48 hours, far exceeding the threshold. The movement was no longer one homeowner versus the board. It was an entire community, galvanized by the power of a legally executed physical protest. The board, sequestered in their administrative bunker, realized too late that the delivery of the 6,600 pounds of copper currency had been less a payment and more the declaration of a civil war. The formation of the Grand Cypress Accountability Coalition, GCAC, and the submission of a legally sound petition demanding an emergency general meeting sent the HOA Board into a state of frantic, cornered desperation. The sheer weight of the 1.2 million pennies was now translating directly into the weight of public opinion, and the board, led by the panicking chairman and the vindictive vice president Patrice, realized their reign was swiftly nearing its end. They shifted immediately from petty fining to a massive, expensive legal stonewall designed to derail the meeting and discredit the lead homeowner. Their first tactic was to challenge the validity of the petition. They hired a high-priced corporate law firm, billing the expense directly back to the HOA, another act of financial recklessness that further fueled the community's anger. The firm's sole task was to find any technical error in the signatures. They meticulously cross-referenced every single name against the official property deed records, claiming several signatures were invalid because they were cast by non-owner spouses, adult children who cohabitated, or residents whose deeds had minor technical discrepancies. This effort was intended not to win, but to delay, forcing the GCAC to spend weeks validating and regathering the names, thus breaking the momentum of the copper tsunami. While the lawyers handled the bureaucratic assault, Vice President Patrice orchestrated a vicious smear campaign against the homeowner who delivered the pennies. Leveraging the vague harassment claims they had previously rescinded, Patrice began anonymously distributing flyers and posting on non-official community forums, painting the homeowner as a troublemaker, a litigious anarchist, and a person with a history of instability and disruptive behavior. The narrative was simple. This entire movement was not about financial transparency, but about one individual's desire for personal vengeance, paid for thousands of dollars of inconvenient coins solely to harass the elderly office manager, Susan. She hoped to fracture the GCAC by making the members afraid of being associated with a perceived extremist. However, the community was too galvanized, and the homeowner's attorney was too prepared. The lawyer responded to the technical challenge with a clear, concise counter-demand, threatening sanctions against the board for abusing the discovery process. Furthermore, the attorney pointed out that many of the invalid signatures had been cast by the very people the board had previously recognized for voting purposes in past elections, creating an immediate, damning contradiction. The delayed tactic was quickly neutralized by the threat of judicial review. As the legal challenges failed, the board resorted to the final, most audacious stall. They refused to book the community center for the emergency meeting. The board chairman claimed the space was unavailable indefinitely due to unscheduled and necessary structural maintenance, despite the fact that residents saw board members using the gym just hours after notice was issued. This blatant, transparent lie infuriated the GCAC, which immediately scheduled a meeting for the largest space they could rent privately, the ballroom of a local hotel, a venue that accommodated 5 times the number of people the community center could hold. The GCAC sent out a massive, expensive mailer to every homeowner, not only announcing the new, larger location, but also explicitly stating that the board was using HOA funds to fight the community's right to assemble. This final, desperate attempt at obstruction proved to be the board's undoing. The community's outrage reached a fever pitch. The board's actions proved the central tenet of the penny protest. They were so arrogant and unaccountable that they would waste thousands more in legal fees and lie about structural maintenance just to avoid facing the consequences of their financial actions. They had thrown every weapon they had, fines, lawyers, smears, and lies, at the homeowner, only to find their efforts had amplified the cause. The stage was now set for the showdown, not in their cramped, defensible community center, but on neutral, public ground. With a massive scale, the community's revolt will be undeniably clear. The emergency general meeting, held in the rented, expansive ballroom of the Grand Hyatt Hotel, was a culmination of weeks of calculated administrative warfare. The board's futile attempt to suppress the meeting only served to guarantee its success. The room was packed. Over 400 residents attended, a massive turnout representing the vast majority of the community and far exceeding the necessary quorum. The scale of the attendance, necessitated by the board's refusal to open the community center, instantly confirmed the gravity of the revolt. The atmosphere was electric, tense, and unified by the memory of the copper tsunami. The GCAC had meticulously prepared the agenda, and the homeowner who executed the penny protest, though not speaking until the end, sat in the front row, a silent, powerful symbol of successful defiance. The meeting began with the board chairman, visibly shaken and flanked by two expensive, bored-looking attorneys, attempting a damage control narrative. He offered a strained non-apology, blaming the fee increase on unforeseen economic turbulence, and attempting to dismiss the past month's events as a miscommunication. His nervous, defensive tone only fueled the crowd's impatience. The moment the floor was open for forensic audit presentation, the meeting truly began. The GCAC had hired a certified public accountant, CPA, from outside the region, ensuring independence. The CPA, using visual aids projected onto a massive screen, began systematically dissecting the HOA's financial records. The findings, presented in cold, hard numbers, were devastating and provided the concrete evidence the community needed. The CPA focused on the amorphous line items that had troubled the homeowners for months. The $50,000 for consulting fees, for instance, was revealed to have been paid entirely to a shell corporation owned by a close personal friend of the chairman, with no corresponding record of services rendered. The $80,000 reserve study refreshment was not, as claimed, a study, but a massive expenditure on high-end office furniture and a new, lavish kitchen installed in a private annex of the management office, used almost exclusively by the board members. Even more damning were the daily expense reports, which showed the board, primarily Vice President Patrice, billing the HOA for excessive, high-end restaurant meals, personal travel expenses disguised as site visits, and repeated purchases of electronic equipment that never materialized in the community center. The CPA concluded with a devastating summary. The $12,000 fee increase was entirely unnecessary and was designed solely to cover an estimated $150,000 deficit created by 2 years of deliberate misappropriation and reckless spending by the current board. The pennies, which had physically embodied the community's frustration, were now justified by the proof of financial malfeasance. The quiet, professional dismantling of the financial records served as the administrative execution of the current leadership. As the CPA finished, the silence in the ballroom was broken by a wave of furious murmurs. The board's lawyers immediately objected, claiming the audit was biased and inadmissible, but their objections were drowned out by the hundreds of angry homeowners demanding justice. The floor was then immediately open for the vote of no confidence. The ballots were distributed, collected, and counted by independent volunteers under the watchful eyes of the assembly. The outcome was a foregone conclusion, but the official tally was dramatic. 98% voted to immediately remove the chairman, Vice President Patrice, and their allies from the board. Their reign of tyranny had ended not with a single coin, but with a landslide vote driven by the evidence the coins had forced into existence. The landslide vote of no confidence delivered at the emergency general meeting acted as a sudden, irreversible administrative execution. The immediate aftermath was characterized by chaos, resignations, and the rapid collapse of the board's authority. The sheer volume of the vote, $98%, left the ousted leaders with no legal or moral ground to stand on. The board chairman, confronted with the irrefutable evidence of the forensic audit and the overwhelming mandate of the community, didn't even wait for the meeting's official minutes to be drafted. The following morning, his resignation was faxed to the management company. It was a curt, self-pitying note citing intolerable personal pressures and completely omitting any mention of the financial malfeasance. He simply abandoned his post, choosing retreat over accountability. However, the most satisfying collapse was that of Vice President Patrice. For years, she had been the face of the HOA's petty tyranny, meticulously enforcing rules while secretly draining the association's funds. Unlike the chairman, who fled silently, Patrice attempted a final, defiant stand. She issued an angry, protracted email to the community listserv, labeling the meeting a hostile coup orchestrated by a single malicious troublemaker and attempting to discredit the audit as a fabrication. Her email was immediately intercepted and countered by the CAC's attorney, who responded with a terse statement confirming the audit's validity and noting the chairman's resignation. Realizing she was entirely isolated and facing the prospect of being personally named in a civil suit to recover the misappropriated funds, Patrice was forced to resign hours later. Her official departure was a bitter, handwritten letter dropped unceremoniously at the management office door, marking the end of the most toxic leadership the community had ever known. With the executive leadership gone, the GCAC immediately activated the HOA's bylaws concerning vacancies. An interim board, composed primarily of the highly organized, financially literate homeowners who had led the petition, was formally installed. Their first action was to freeze all discretionary spending and formally appoint the independent CPA who conducted the forensic review as the interim financial controller. The final, tangible symbol of the past regime's collapse was the 1.2 million pennies themselves. Mr. Harrison, the management supervisor who had facilitated the board's excesses, was ordered by the new interim board to immediately cease all attempts to manually count the remaining coin. He was instead instructed to arrange for a commercial, high-capacity coin transport service to collect the 6,600 pounds of copper and deposit it at the bank, bearing the associated costs himself as a gesture of good faith to the community he had failed. The sight of the specialized armored truck pulling up to the management office and the subsequent heavy loading of the dozens of plastic buckets was documented and celebrated across the community forum. The copper tsunami had finally reached its final destination, the association's bank account, transforming from a physical protest into usable capital. It was a monumental, heavy-handed closure to an era of corruption, and the new interim board now faced a daunting yet hopeful task of rebuilding trust and rectifying years of damage. The revolution had been paid for, shilling by shilling, and the cleanup was just beginning. With the toxic leadership gone and the $12,000 from the coin protest finally deposited and usable, the new interim board, composed of the Grand Cypress Accountability Coalition, GCAC, leaders, immediately set about repairing the structural and psychological damage done by the previous regime. Their first act was to establish absolute, verifiable financial transparency, a direct response to the lack of oversight that had necessitated the copper tsunami. They created an easy-to-read, real-time online ledger, accessible to all homeowners, detailing every expenditure over $100, a radical change from the previous system of intentionally confusing financial statements. The psychological victory was swiftly followed by physical improvements. The new board had to demonstrate tangible results to maintain the community's trust. The first major project funded was a repair of the centerpiece fountain in the main plaza, which had been dry and neglected for months. The repair was completed quickly and affordably, proving that the previous board's claims of excessive repair costs were simply lies. The sight of the water flowing again was a potent, visible symbol of the community's renewal. Next, the dangerously broken air conditioning unit at the community gym, which had rendered the facility unusable during the height of summer, was finally replaced. The new board solicited 3 competitive bids, choosing the most responsible option, a stark contrast to the previous board habit of selecting the most expensive, non-competitive bids from affiliated vendors. The gym reopened within 2 weeks, signaling the return of basic amenities that residents had been paying for all along. The interim board also focused on rectifying the smaller, more petty abuses. They immediately suspended all aesthetic violation fines issued under the old regime, acknowledging that these were often used as tools of intimidation rather than genuine code enforcement. They initiated a review process that required multiple warnings and a homeowner board consultation before any fine could be levied. This action diffused the constant, low-level tension that had plagued the neighborhood, allowing residents to breathe a collective sigh of relief. The community was beginning to heal, but the fight for full justice, the recovery of the stolen funds, was just commencing. The focus now shifted from internal governance to external legal action against the perpetrators. The comprehensive forensic audit, which had triggered the board's downfall, was now weaponized to the next phase: financial recovery. The interim board, leveraging the evidence gathered, retained a specialized litigation firm to pursue a civil lawsuit against the former chairman and the notoriously vindictive Patrice. The core of the suit was a clear-cut allegation of breach of fiduciary duty, demanding the repayment of the estimated $150,000 in misappropriated and recklessly spent HOA funds. The lawsuit was designed to be as public and uncomfortable as possible, ensuring that the former leaders could not simply retreat into quiet suburban life. The legal documents detailed every lavish meal, every questionable consulting fee paid to friends, and every unauthorized purchase of furniture disguised as capital improvements. The court filings became public record, exposing the full extent of their self-serving greed to the wider world. The legal process was not swift, but it was relentless. Patrice, in particular, fought back, utilizing the same aggressive legal tactics she had employed while in office. She attempted to countersue, claiming emotional distress and harassment stemming from the original penny payment. This maneuver backfired spectacularly. The judge dismissed her counterclaim, citing the overwhelming evidence of her own financial malfeasance as the sole cause of any distress. Her attempt to turn the copper tsunami from a symbol of legitimate protest into a legal liability failed completely. The true pressure point was the freeze placed on their assets. The interim board's lawyer quickly moved to place a preliminary lien on the personal properties of the former chairman and Patrice, pending the outcome of the suit. This financial entanglement was devastating. It meant they could not sell or refinance their own homes until the HOA recovered its funds. Suddenly, the money they had stolen was costing them far more in legal fees and financial paralysis. The former leaders, who had once sneered at the rules, were now trapped by the relentless machinery of the law, a clear message that their abuses would not simply be forgiven. The court battle was long, but the tide was turning inexorably in favor of the homeowners. As the legal proceedings dragged on, the interim board focused on fulfilling its central promise, proving that the catastrophic $12,000 annual assessment was unnecessary. 6 months after the penny protest, the new board convened a meticulously organized, open-to-the-public meeting to present the revised annual budget. This meeting was a testament to the new era of transparency. The presentation was stunning in its clarity and fiscal responsibility. The interim treasurer demonstrated, line by line, where the previous board had inflated costs and created phantom expenses. By eliminating the sham consulting fees, canceling padded maintenance contracts with affiliated vendors, and prioritizing necessary spending, the board found massive savings. They revealed that the true, necessary operating cost of the HOA was only slightly higher than it had been before the corrupt administration took over. The climax of the meeting was the announcement of the new annual assessment fee. With a dramatic pause, the interim board chairman announced that, based on a transparent and lean budget, the annual fee would be reduced by over 80%, settling at a figure that was actually lower than the 2 years prior, before the previous board had begun its systematic mismanagement. The room erupted in applause, a wave of relief washing over the hundreds of attending homeowners. The massive, fraudulent fee, which had been the catalyst of the entire coin catastrophe, was officially dead. The pennies had won a complete financial victory. Furthermore, the board revealed the status of the reserve fund. The previous board had claimed the fund was depleted, but the audit proved they had merely moved the money into hidden, improperly categorized accounts. The new board restored and properly funded the reserve, ensuring that future capital projects, like the promised playground refurbishing, could be paid for without emergency assessments. The community was no longer just functioning. It was financially solvent and ethically managed. The collective memory of the penny payment solidified as the moment when the community bought back its own financial integrity. The restoration of community amenities became a powerful symbol of the new era. The money saved by cutting corrupt contracts was immediately allocated to completing the long-stalled projects. The new board initiated and oversaw the complete refurbishment of the playground equipment, installing modern, safe structures that had been promised to residents for years. The grand opening of the new playground was a massive community event, featuring a barbecue and a palpable sense of shared accomplishment. At the center of this new communal spirit, the board chose to commemorate the pivotal moment of the copper tsunami. They commissioned a small, tasteful, and subtly defiant piece of public art to be placed near the fountain, the very amenity the previous board had let rot. The installation was a small, sleek bronze plaque embedded in a stone pedestal. It didn't mention the names of the corrupt former leaders, but it contained a short inscription referencing the community's successful struggle for transparency. Crucially, the plaque was inlaid with a small, perfectly preserved cluster of 120 pennies, sealed in resin. It was an abstract, geometric pattern of the very coins that had been used to pay the fee. The inscription read simply, "In commemoration of the return to honest governance, paid in full legal tender." It became known instantly as the Copper Memorial. The memorial served as an essential, physical reminder of the cost of complacency. It was a subtle but profound signal to every future board member that the residents of Grand Cypress would not tolerate financial abuse again. The memory of the 6,600 pound of copper, the administrative gridlock, and the eventual legal reckoning was forever etched into the landscape, ensuring that the saga of the $12,000 fee and the resulting revolution would never be forgotten. The community had not just changed leaders, it had changed its culture, making accountability its highest governing principle. The final chapter of the saga played out not in a dramatic courtroom, but in the quiet, decisive process of legal settlement. Faced with the mountain of evidence from the forensic audit and the relentless pressure of the property liens, the former chairman and Patrice realized their legal defense was untenable and prohibitively expensive. They entered into a confidential settlement agreement with the HOA. The details of the settlement were legally guarded, but the key outcome was public. The Grand Cypress Homeowners Association recovered a substantial portion of the misappropriated funds, sufficient to replenish the depleted reserves and cover the community's legal fees. The recovery meant that the homeowners, who had effectively been defrauded, did not bear the financial cost of their leaders' corruption. This was the final, satisfying financial validation of the protest. With the legal battle concluded and the community fully stabilized, the interim board oversaw the first free and fair election in years. The community elected a full, permanent board composed entirely of highly vetted, committed, and transparent residents. The homeowner who had masterminded the penny protest, having achieved the core goal of financial transparency, chose not to run for the board, preferring to remain the community's quiet, vigilant watchdog. Life in Grand Cypress settled into a new, functional normalcy. The mail now brought simple, clear financial updates, not furious fines or exorbitant demands. The community center was busy, the gym was cool, and the fountain flowed. The legend of the $12,000 coin catastrophe persisted, a story passed down to new residents about the time the community fought back against tyranny, not with violence, but with the heaviest, most legally undeniable payment in history. The quiet click of a few thousand pennies being deposited at the bank had ultimately purchased freedom, transparency, and a renewed sense of pride in the place they call home. The long, heavy fight for accountability was finally, completely over.